Hi, my name is Rob Bucari. I'm a teacher at Carmel High School, and I'm here on the grounds of the Seneca Falls Convention building, which really kick-started the struggle for women's rights in 1848. During this convention, women and men came together and began to demand equality, including the right to vote. One of the things that they did here was rewrite the Declaration of Independence.
Mr. Riley here, and welcome as we talk about the Women's Rights Convention that was held here. And the famous document that was signed was called the Declaration of Sentiments, and it sounds very similar to the Declaration of Independence. So Elizabeth Caddy Stanton basically took the Declaration of Independence and it applied the phrase all men are created equal to all men and women are created equal. So it was a bold statement back in 1848 of equality and independence, and these were ideas that have been brewing in this area for many, many years. And it took the courage of the delegates to sign the Declaration of Sentiments, and this is the start of a 70-year struggle that eventually led to the passage of the 19th Amendment, and the struggle for women's rights continues all the way to today. So this is the birthplace of the women's rights movement, and make sure you visit Seneca Falls to learn all about it. Seneca Falls is named after the Seneca tribe, which is part of the Iroquois Confederacy, or the Haudenosaunee. And the Haudenosaunee traditionally have been a matriarchal society where women had the right to vote for many, many hundreds of years before the arrival of Europeans. So it makes sense that this would be the birthplace of the women's rights movement. For centuries prior to Europeans, women already had this right. They chose the sachems, and they had a lot of power as the farmers and co-equals of their tribe. So as we go forward, we can look to the past to learn and prepare for the future.
The Women's Rights National Historic Park tells the story of the first Women's Rights Convention held in Seneca Falls on July 19th through July 20th, 1848. The efforts of the women's rights leaders, abolitionists, and other 19th century reformers remind us that all people must be accepted as equals.
All right, so I'm here at the home of Elizabeth Caddy Stanton, and she is the organizer of the Women's Rights Convention in 1848. Elizabeth was a mother of 7 children that she raised here while her husband often went out to work. So it was up to her to educate the children and also wanted to stay involved in the women's rights movement. So here she would often entertain many of her guests and promote the idea of women's suffrage. Many of the leading reformers, such as Frederick Douglass and Lucretia Mott, came here to visit, as this was the first house from the stream and the mills here. So this was a prominent place to go to, and here everyone would engage in lively discussions about many issues of the day, including abolitionism and, of course, women's rights. Elizabeth knew that the right to vote was going to be critical for women to get the equality that they deserve. From this house is where Elizabeth Caddy Stanton will do much of her writing while still raising 7 children.
Behind me is the Seneca Knitting Mills factory, in operation well before the Civil War. It employed mostly women. So I'm here in Seneca Falls, and actually there would have been a falls here in the early 1800s, which would have powered that mill. And that's where the town gets its name from. But why is this the center of women's rights? Women were employed in this factory, certainly during the Civil War as well. They made socks here, woolen socks, and it was one of the major factories in upstate New York. So it just shows you the importance of women as the part of the workforce. Now, they didn't get the right to vote after the Civil War, but certainly their movement to get the right to vote continued and finally bore fruit in 1920 with the 19th Amendment.
Today, the mill is the home of the National Women's Hall of Fame, with the mission of showcasing great women, inspiring all.
We're here at one of the locks along what's called the Seneca Cayuga Canal. Seneca Falls is not just important for women's rights, it's also an important center for industry. This phase 3 of the Erie Canal connects Cayuga Lake with Seneca Lake, and eventually it connects to the Erie Canal itself, which is north of here. So we want to explore not just women's rights, but also the industrial history of the United States and New York.
People came to the Seneca Falls Convention via these lock systems. So it's about transportation, and it's also the internet of ideas. So in the 19th century, the ideas of the reform movements, such as the abolitionists and the women's rights movement, traveled along these canal systems. So it's people, goods, and ideas that come together. And here in Seneca Falls, we have a 50-foot drop that powered the mills and also now provide the lock system to get boats through, back and forth. And this is still operating today, and it's all free, part of our New York State government.
From Seneca Falls, we travel 12 miles east to the town of Auburn, New York.
All right, guys, so I'm here in Auburn, New York, and this is about 20 minutes away from Seneca Falls, and this is the residence of the famous Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, known as Moses of her people, famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, and includes her residency, a barn where she operated her farm, and later on in life, she'll purchase 25 more acres and eventually put up a home for the aged. So throughout her long and remarkable life, she constantly thought of others and was a lifetime of service. It's been documented that Harriet Tubman made approximately 12 trips back down south to help others, including save her family and her parents and bring them north, all the way eventually to Canada. But then they came back here to Auburn, where she provided the residency for her family. Harriet Tubman lived here until the age of 91, and throughout her long life, she was an advocate for helping others. So during the Civil War, she served as a nurse, a cook, and a scout, who famously was the first woman in combat and led a mission at the Combahee River down in South Carolina that led to the freedom of between 800 and 900 enslaved people and brought them to freedom. Harriet was friends with Lucretia Mott, and throughout her years, Harriet was often an advocate for women's rights movement as well, and she will help the women's rights cause by going on speaking tours. Harriet Tubman is also an entrepreneur, so while here at her residence, she often operated a pig farm too, as a way to make money for her family and to keep the residents going. This is the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged. So later in her years, she purchased 25 acres of property and eventually will turn this home into a home for the elderly. So throughout her life, Harriet Tubman constantly gave back to people, and she was selfless to the very end.
The Harriet Tubman National Historic Park was established on January 10, 2017, and is managed by the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church to share Harriet's core values with visitors through a guided tour of the property. Tubman received about $200 for her service in the military and did not begin to get a pension until the 1890s, and that was for her husband's military service, not for her own. Nevertheless, when she died in 1913 at the age of about 91, she was buried with full military honors. In 2003, a bill sponsored by Hillary Clinton granted Tubman a full pension of $11,750, which was passed on to the Harriet Tubman Home historic site in Auburn, New York. On May 12, 1851, after attending an anti-slavery lecture by William Lloyd Garrison, Anthony and Stanton were introduced on the streets of Seneca Falls, New York, by dress reform advocate Amelia Bloomer, thus forming part of the team that would later lead various women's rights organizations. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Caddy Stanton were principal leaders of the women's suffrage movement during the middle and latter 19th century. The meeting this sculpture depicts was an essential waypoint on the path to the passage of the 19th Amendment, which established the right of American women to vote in 1920, some 70 years after the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848.
So make sure you take those historic selfies right here in the town of Seneca Falls and share them with your friends and family. All right, guys, bye for now, and keep living history.
This video is dedicated to my mom, Margaret Riley, who has instilled a love of travel and history in her children and grandchildren. Thanks, Mom.